Welcome back to The Bridges Between Us, a podcast from Caring Bridge sharing real stories from real people navigating health journeys. Stories about caregiving, connection, uncertainty, and the many ways support shows up when life changes unexpectedly. My name is Andy Tiemann. Today I'm here with John Carter. He's a father, a soldier, and a healthcare executive with nearly 2 decades of experience working with physicians and executives all over the country. He knows how the system works. He knows what levers to pull. He knows the language. He also knows about leading through complexity from his time as an Army officer and commander. But none of that grit or healthcare prowess could have prepared him for the moment a cardiologist walked into his son's NICU with bad news. In this episode of The Bridges Between Us, John shares the full story of his son's diagnosis and treatment, including a crash after surgery, reintubation, infection, and 2 separate instances when John and his wife Vanessa weren't sure if their little guy would make it. But John tells this story best.
When we found out my son had CHD, I knew 2 people whose children had CHD. And so I reached out and she was like, you got to go set up this caring bridge. Like, this is the only way to do this. And we'll probably get into this in the conversation, but we didn't tell a lot of our immediate family. We told our immediate family when we found out, because we found out in utero, but we didn't tell a lot of our friends or extended friends and network. Like, we just didn't know exactly what we were up against because we were getting such mixed kind of diagnosis and what's this ultimately going to be. You know, it was in the back burner, but I never really set it up. And then you were probably reading, like, we thought we were going home. They were like, hey, you're clear, you're going home. And then it might as well have been a grenade going off in the NICU room when we found out we were not going home. We were going to have surgery. And so that's when I said, look, there's only one way to, I can't take all the phone calls. I can't take all the texts. Like, I set up Caring Bridge immediately, set it up for like my parents. And then I called our parents and we're like, you guys can communicate this to everybody else, but we don't want phone calls. Our hands are full. If it doesn't come from you and it doesn't come through Caring Bridge, I'm not dealing with it. And so that in and of itself was a godsend. And then just the ability for the access and who do you want to give access to? And so, yeah, it's, anyway, so that's what I told Stephanie. I was like, we're your biggest advocate. I will for always sing your praises. You just tell me when and where, but we wouldn't have made it through, I don't think, the way that we made it through if it wouldn't have been for the platform.
Tell me about that. Tell me about, you have a daughter, right? So you already had 1 child, and then you're rolling in with number 2. You got a boy on the way. Tell me about the lead up and the pregnancy, and then you're at the hospital. Like, how did that all go?
Yeah, that's, was a whole nother journey probably outside of kind of our Caring Bridge adventure. So, we had a daughter, kind of an interesting backstory. So we were a little late to the game in terms of having kids. You know, most of our friends, their kids are, sophomores in high school and into college. And we got started a little late. I remember telling my wife when we had our first child, technically, this is classified as a geriatric pregnancy, and you're going to have to go see this doctor called a maternal fetal medicine physician. And let me just say that didn't go over very well. But, it was just kind of a routine check and procedure. And so for our daughter, kind of an interesting story too, we ended up having her during COVID. She had to go see an MFM. And it was just a kind of, hey, everything looks good. Thanks for coming. I think you have a happy, healthy baby. No issues. Go back to your OB. Story kind of continues as usual with a side deviation of, COVID, and trying to have a kid during COVID was a whole nother roller coaster. And so, you fast forward 3 years later and we found out that we were going to have our son. We were probably less than 5 months. We were probably somewhere around 4.5 months in to the pregnancy when we had to go see the MFM. Based off the previous experience with my daughter, I didn't think anything of it. Vanessa, my wife, didn't think anything of it. And so I was on a work trip. I was actually at Becker's. I was at Becker's Healthcare Annual Conference in Chicago, and I got a phone call, and it was my wife, and it was in the middle of the day, so she knew I was working. So, kind of that awkward, like, something's not right. So I take the phone call, and she's just devastated. She's just in tears and she's crying. And I'm trying to make out what she's saying. Like, the doctor says we've got this and this is what's going on. And we don't know, but there's this congenital heart defect, and the whole world turns upside down. And so then it was like, what, do I just pack up and go home now? Like, we don't know. So what did the doctor say? And she said, we need to keep an eye on it, and we really need to make sure that we take this seriously. And so I have a follow-up in 4 weeks, and they want to see how far this has progressed. And so I obviously cleared my schedule and went with her the second time to go see the MFM. And she confirmed. She said, "You guys, your son's going to have a congenital heart defect. Pretty sure it's a coarctation of the aorta. There's some other things that we're worried about with the tricuspid valve, et cetera. But luckily we caught it in utero. But then we had to go back to our OB and have a conversation, and that kind of started our journey, which was, I know this is your hospital. I know this is your OB. This is no longer your care team. We had to transfer our entire care over to a dedicated unit for congenital heart defect, which means we picked up a new OB. We picked up our MFM, which did have privileges over there, our cardiac surgeon. We had to go kind of interview everybody, go talk to everybody, make sure that we picked the right program. Luckily, I've been in healthcare for 16, 17 years. I called in every favor that I knew from every friend and every physician and every chief medical officer around the country that I knew, every surgeon. I've got a dear friend that used to run a cardiac ICU unit, pediatric cardiac ICU. And so I first call was, "Hey, Jim, what am I dealing with? What am I up against? What questions do I need to ask this physician?" So then we transitioned to go interview our care team and went through the orientation. And you probably saw in there kind of that experience of just that gut wrenching, just unsettling, just I don't know what's going to happen moment as we kind of decided, what care team we were going to use and what facility we were going to use and the surgeon we were going to use and kind of what next steps would look like. And when it really set in that we were on a roller coaster, and we didn't know exactly what it was going to look like. And so we had planned that when he was born, we were immediately going to surgery. Like, that was kind of the worst case scenario. I've never seen so many people in an OR. I'm pretty sure the fire marshal would have been a little bit of an eyebrow raise. I mean, we had two OBs, a first assist, we had the CRNA anesthesia, we had a neonatologist, a nurse practitioner. I mean, it was I'd never seen the room that full. His entire care team, my wife's entire care team, and luckily I was able to talk the care team into, if everything looks okay, can he at least get a moment with mom before we whisk him away to this back elevator and straight down to the NICU or to the cardiac ICU or to the surgery, to the OR. We didn't know where we were going. That whole journey leading up into the point of, what are we dealing with, was an adventure in and of itself, kind of going through that process. And that's where you really get that patient perspective of what the healthcare system really works like for the normal person. So it was,
Well, tell me, Walter, I mean, so much of it was, advocating for Canon, which is a great name, by the way. And then, but also respectfully critiquing the care team. Like, how did all that go for you?
some better than others. And so, funny story, he's our little freedom baby, right? So he was technically going to be born on the 4th of July, but we were planned C-section. So we planned it for the 5th of July. And so leave it to us to have a kid, have a boy, name him Cannon, and he's born on the 4th of July and comes out with a bang. Like, you probably couldn't write a better story. He got his name because his daddy was a field artillery officer in the Army. And as we looked up the name, because we'd already kind of made up our mind that was going to be his name, as we looked up the name, it meant wild, unyielding spirit. And let me tell you, this kid lives up to his name. It was interesting because when he was born, he was 9 pounds. And so immediately, one, he's a big baby, because the doctor told my wife, the best thing you can do is get this kid as big and as healthy as you possibly can. And she took it to heart. She ate everything she could get her hands on. Her entire job in life was to get this kid as big as possible to undergo what was about to happen. So he was 9 pounds. And so they were like, well, maybe he doesn't. Maybe this isn't as big of an issue as we thought, right? Because usually heart babies are not that big because they're working overtime. And so they were like, well, let's go to NICU, kind of triage. Let's take some tests. Let's see what we're up against. And so I immediately go to NICU. My wife stays there. Her mom stays with her. Long story short, they kind of do all the tests. They can't find it. No coarct, no issues. Everything's going well. Everything looks great. Maybe he outgrew this. So we do some more tests. Same thing. Everything looks great. He's a happy, healthy baby. We're breastfeeding. We're doing all the things like you would do with a normal baby. He just happens to be tied up to all these monitors in the NICU while we're triaging him. All the while, the nurses are coming down the hallway calling him Hercules and showing him off because they've never seen a 9-pound baby in the NICU. Then, basically we were all but without discharge orders in hand, right? I mean, it was the neonatologist thought we were going home. Our ped cardiologist thought we were probably going home. And he said, we just want to be as cautious as possible because of what we saw, in utero. And so we're going to do one more echo after the PDA closes just to be sure. And if that one looks good, we'll discharge you. You guys can go home. And so that was the same day that our NICU neighbor, who had been there for over 80 days, had just got word that they were going home. had been there for over 80 days, just got word they were going home. We were in the middle of a celebration. I mean, we were all, so happy for this little baby and this family that was fixing to go home. And the cardiologist, as soon as he walked in the door, I knew something was wrong. You could just see it on his face. And he said, "Hey, we found it. It was right behind the PDA." And so when the PDA closed, it's unmistakable. He has a coarc, showed me the echo. You could see it clear as day. It was like a grenade went off in that room. You could have heard a pin drop. Everybody's crying. We then knew that our entire journey was going to change. That kind of started the process of, okay, what do we do next? And how do we get into the cardiac unit? And as any traditional healthcare service is in this country, it's capacity and resource constrained. I will say this: the clinical team was amazing. They work miracles every day. These physicians and surgeons, these clinicians, these nurses, at every scary turn, watching them jump into action was just pure orchestra of just absolute execution. So I'm never going to knock the clinical team for the work that they did. The challenge, and where I had to advocate over and over and over again, is in the systems and processes. When you're resource and capacity constraint, there's bottlenecks, there's holding patterns, and that is where I had to fiercely advocate. And sometimes I think it went well, and unfortunately, and being in the system as long as I have, I know which levers to pull, and we were able to work through some of it, and sometimes you have to pull the lever you don't want to, and you have to upset some folks and ruffle some feathers. But that's part of being a patient advocate. And so it was always about, where is the system breaking down that's causing these problems? Because your clinical team's exceptional, and we've just got to maintain efficiency, we've got to maintain throughput, and we've just got to stay the course. And that's all of our issues, all of the heart dropping, we don't know what's going to happen next. Other shoe hits the floor moments were all because of holding patterns and because of system constraints. And that was the hardest part for me. Somebody that's been in this industry this long, to see is, as much as I know about the system and as much as I know about healthcare and as many clients as I work with all over the country, to see, like, from a patient perspective, what happens to the people who don't know how to move through the system like I do. They're just along for the ride and terrified. Like, I had people I could call. I had levers I could pull. I had ways I could push and advocate. And even for me, it was a daunting challenge. They call it the intensive care unit for a reason. That was the most intense experience of my life. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy.
Well, and you had a quote that was like something out of I don't know, a movie, that your missions are aligned, but they're not the same. Like that. That is, it's a poignant, perfect way to describe what you just described. Was that just the title of a post on Caring Bridge, or was that like a thing that you were telling people?
Yeah, it was more a thing I was telling people. It was, we had a lot of conversations, right? And it's, again, I never questioned the clinical judgment, and I never interfered with shift change, right? I know that those are kind of critical moments, and so I'd always sit back, but I also said, "Hey, when you walk into this room, like, I got questions and I want updates, and we're all going to be in lockstep." And where I had to advocate was the hardest challenge for me was understanding, and I don't know if you saw the moment of perspective, right? Like, I remember, really pushing to get my son on the surgery schedule, and him not being able to get surgery, but having the realization that it was because there was an emergency. So going back to when we, had our son, we thought we were immediately going to the OR, and we didn't. Somebody else's kiddo had to go immediately to the OR. And so that perspective was, there are other kiddos in here that need this surgery, and probably in a much worse condition than Canon. And so you just have to understand that perspective. Or seeing the family that was going through their orientation after we'd been in the NICU for a week, kind of waiting to make the transition once we found out, and just remembering that entire experience of going through that orientation. And so there was so much perspective, but where I kept coming back to was, I'm gonna press and I'm gonna advocate, and I understand that your mission is to create efficiencies and to get these kiddos through the system. That's where they are aligned. We both want the same thing, but the missions are not the same, because this one is my patient and this one is my son. And this is frankly the only one I care about in this moment. And we've got to do what's best for him. And we can't keep hitting these holding patterns, because you kind of mentioned in the earlier part of the conversation, right? Like a mix of military and healthcare. Holding patterns are dangerous in military and operations and in healthcare. And that's, I think, where I really had to press the hardest, is when I realized that of no fault of our own or through the clinical process, we were in a holding pattern because of a system constraint. That's where it probably got a little bit more challenging. I think they gave me a lot of grace because of what we were going through, and obviously little sleep and probably high emotion. And I gave them a ton of grace because clinically they were amazing and they were fighting the same constraints I was, just from a different perspective. And so I think we were able to navigate that as well as could be. I'm sure there's some times where I probably upset them and ruffled their feathers, and there were certainly times where they upset me and ruffled my feathers, but it wasn't by anything they were doing. It was just, how do we make this work better, and how do we get to the next point, and then to the next point, and then to the next point on this journey.
Totally understandable, and, like, I feel like what you're describing are these little victories that you talked about a lot, like, that I'm sure there were big moments, big successes, huge accomplishments for you as the advocate and father, but also for Cannon, like, pulling off a miracle. Tell me about the appreciation of those little things that accumulated to kinda, turn a corner or to start to shape the story differently.
It's hopium. When you're in that environment and you're in that pressure cooker, for lack of a better term, if you're constantly looking at the end of the race, it just gets longer and longer and longer and longer. And every time we got comfortable and kind of thought we were in the clear is when the other shoe dropped. And so it really became, we can't just focus on the end of the race and getting out the door. We've got to focus on the next objective in front of us. So, what has to happen to move our care journey forward? And we're going to put all our energy and effort into that next benchmark, into that next goal. What has to happen from there? We're going to put all of our energy and effort into just that next goal, because you look at, you going back to the military, right? Like you look at the war, that's complex. Sometimes you just got to focus on the battle in front of you. We learned that lesson the hard way. We'll just say that we had a couple times where we kind of had that relief and we had that excitement, and that was when we got punched in the gut the worst. There were a couple times where, there was two distinct times where we almost lost him. Early on, and that was tough. And so you just you just focused on that next one, the next thing you got to do.
How long were you in it deep before it turned and there was kind of a more sustained hope and you felt positive and you weren't as scared? Like, how long were you in it like that?
The roller coaster continues, right? That's why they say it's a roller coaster. I would say in segments, kind of that first roller coaster ride was, hey, everything's fine, and you guys are likely going to go home with a happy, healthy baby, and we believed it. And then it was, you're not going home, you're having surgery, and here's all the other complications that are coming along with it. And then it was in the NICU, we lost one of our NICU neighbors, and that was tough. You just realize how the work that these people do impacts. They're doing God's work. I mean, it is what it is, And then you go through that next cycle of like, okay, we finally made it to clarity. We've gotten into surgery, and we're going to get out of surgery, and we're going into recovery. Well, he crashed after surgery, and so we almost lost him. And the clinical team again was amazing. Like we thought that was kind of the end of the big journey, right? It was just surgery, and we little did we know that was the beginning of a much greater challenge. And then he got an infection, right? Well, actually got an infection before surgery, so that was kind of the next one. Then the crash after surgery, and then his body didn't respond well, and he had to be reintubated, and so it was almost like day zero all over again. So there were just so many instances of a reset to day zero that we just had to take it obstacle by obstacle, and the clarity and the, if you will, the celebratory moments were just, we've cleared the obstacle. Because when we said clearing the hospital is the obstacle, I don't think we would have managed the 30 days that we were in there. And even up into to discharge, we were having arguments and fights with specialty pharmacy and infusion, and how do we get this? And we got to get this for discharge. And I mean, we didn't leave until I think 10:30 at night on his discharge day, because we were still fighting the fight against the system. None of this was clinician, none of this was physician. And I wouldn't even blame the hospital. It's just the nature of this kludgeaucracy of this healthcare system of just these siloed fixes of patchworks that have just all been tied together that create all these problems. For me, it reinvigorated my passion for healthcare, that we've got to do better at getting the system and the admin stuff out of the way of physicians and clinicians and just let them do what they do best. And that's, I think that was my biggest takeaway is, I think it was Mary Jean Ryan, right, from SSM Health that said systems save people, but systems can kill people too. And that was probably the most prophetic experience of my life, and that being in that ICU was just understanding that it's the system, it's the process, it's the bottlenecks, it's the workflow, it's the lack of efficiencies and throughput that are creating a lot of these problems. And so there was no big overarching, like, how do we know when we've gotten comfortable? Because every time we got comfortable, we got a gut punch, and it was just, let's just focus one obstacle at a time, one goal at a time, and that was, I think, what preserved our sanity.
Yeah, I mean, that forced perspective is tough. Sounds like you got it quick, but that must have been really, really hard. I can't even imagine. But you talk a lot about your tribe. In fact, you mentioned that your tribe, you thank them in every post on Caring Bridge. Like how tell me how that interaction and that, when you said early on, don't text me, don't call me, or I won't respond. Like it's going to be on Caring Bridge or it's going to come from here or there. Like, how did you draw those boundaries and use that as a tool to, again, preserve your sanity, but also get the updates out to the people who cared?
Yeah, yeah, there are two things that helped us, outside of just kind of our little bubble inside the ICU that helped us get through this process, and that was our tribe, and I say tribe because this was family, this was extended family, this was friends, this was our entire, when they say it takes a village, our entire community rallied behind us, and it was Caringbridge. There's no way we would have made it through, without this platform. And so from the tribe side, I think back to, I think back to my daughter. Right, we brought my daughter home from the hospital, and again, it was during COVID. It was a little bit unique, but there was a meal train set up, and there was food every day at our front porch to help us through the process, and just you're just so grateful. And for our son, it was interesting because the meal train really wasn't going to work. We weren't home. My mother-in-law was fortunate enough to be able to take some FMLA and take leave and come from California and stay here with us in Texas to be with my daughter so that we could live at the hospital. We lived at the hospital, and then we got housing off campus at the hospital for 30 days. We didn't live at home. And so, the value of Caring Bridge was that connection piece to our tribe, but also helping articulate what we needed. We didn't need meal train. We needed DoorDash gift cards, right? Because we were living at the hospital. Or sometimes people would bring us meals and drop them off, and we would go out and pick them up. But also, as soon as everything switched from you're probably going home to you're not and you're having surgery, I knew that because we didn't tell a lot of people except our immediate family that there was going to be a flux of calls. And where do you put this information? Like, this is not a Facebook publication, right? This is not meant for the rest of the world. This is meant to keep our people, our family, our friends that are close to us through this journey in the loop on what's going on, but also what we need. And so, I had a friend. I know two people whose children have had CHD, and so I called one of my friends, again going back to what are we up against, and tell me what to do. And she said, "Look, one of the things I can tell you right now is you need to set up a Caring Bridge account." And I had never heard of Caring Bridge. And so I looked at it, and so in that moment, I went in and I set it up, and I restricted all permissions, so only the people that we wanted could be in the platform, and it gave me a way to share the information. And then we told our immediate family, "Hey, we will communicate with you, but I am turning my phone off. I'm not gonna have my phone while I'm in the hospital. I'm not taking phone calls, I'm not taking texts. The one thing you can do for me is to tell everybody to leave me alone. If they want an update, they can do one of two things. They can either call you for it, or they can submit a request on Caring Bridge to get access to our platform. And when I get on at the end of the night to put my thoughts together, I'll approve their access and they can follow along on this journey with us." But then also being able to have access to the resources like the gift cards and just being able to communicate what we need, or, "Hey, can somebody help with our daughter for this?" Or, "Hey, can somebody help my mother-in-law who's at home because she's trying to manage all this for us?" And so we used it as that communication platform. The other thing that was kind of the unintended consequence was it gave me a way, and my wife, but a way to take the notes of the day and to work through the notes and to write out the message. And to some degree, it was a relief to get it off our chest, but it also forced me to write it in a little bit more of a reader-friendly version than just a raw emotional, there's a few in there you can probably read where I was angry and I didn't care who read it. Um, but it gave me a way to kind of get it off my chest and to kind of clear my thoughts and to just kind of get it out there so that I could start each day with a fresh slate. And that was one of the greatest godsends the platform gave to me that I didn't even expect. I like the idea of the restricted access. I love the idea of using it as a communication channel and still keeping it tight knit with just our family, our tribe, our people. But yeah, I just being able to kind of write your thoughts out and just kind of gather your thoughts and prepare for the next day in this journey of every day in that place is a week, every week is a month, and I'm sure if we'd have gone more than the 30 days, every month is a year. The intensity is hard to describe.
So, I mean, he just had his third birthday, right?
Yeah, he just did.
Ah, that's great. So, I mean, how is he doing today? How is today?
He is living his best life. So we have made it through the journey, and then at our last cardiology checkup, we kind of hit the pinnacle of we've arrived, so to speak. And you don't want to get, going back to Hopium, we don't want to get too excited. But he had been cleared from his blood pressure medication, which is typically not the case for a coarc because of the pressure differential. But because his coarc really didn't show until the PDA closed, he really only had the issue for a limited amount of time, and so we kind of were able to wean him off the medication, and he did really well. And so our last cardiology checkup, we'd gotten to where we were doing 6-month checkups. Our last one, we moved to annual checkups, and so we're now in the just a once a year kind of. We're monitoring this. We want to keep a close eye on him, but he's cleared to live his best life and to do whatever his heart desires. And I go back to my original statement. He's living up to his name. He is a wild, unyielding spirit, and he smiles with his whole face. And he is the happiest go lucky. He handled this better than anybody else in the entire process. He was almost unfazed. The kid's tough as nails. It's unreal, and it's been a real joy to see how far he's come and to see how much he's thriving, and especially kind of getting prepared for this today, going back through and reading some of these entries. It really brought up a lot of emotion, but it brought up a lot of perspective too. That our kid was a lucky one. Not all of them have the story that he's had. So I'm really grateful for the advances in modern medicine. I'm really grateful for our care team, and I'm really grateful for Caring Bridge. I mean, the platform. I don't. Again, if it wasn't for our tribe and it wasn't for Caring Bridge, this would have been insurmountable. I think in terms of how we navigated through this journey. So it's tough. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but if anything, if your audience gets this perspective of healthcare is very personal, and it's very real for the patient. And I think if we keep that in mind and we do the right work, we can hopefully make the system better for everybody. But I think every patient needs access to a platform like this if they're going through something like we went through, or if they're going through traumatic brain injury or cancer or whatever it may be. The access to resources, the access to be able to communicate and restrict that access or allow that access is needed for people to follow in your journey, to pay it forward, to donate, to tap into resources. It's a beautiful thing that you all have created.
Well, man, I was going to ask you a wrap up question, but I don't have to anymore. And well, I'm so glad that he's popped out the other side. Congrats on the annuals. That's a big deal. I know. Just getting
Yeah.
finally to the point where you want to keep an eye on it, but it isn't like there's that next appointment in 3 months. Like that's a tough way to live for sure. So I'm so happy for you guys. I'm so happy for Ken. It's so great, and happy birthday to him. And thanks for reaching out and just saying yes and being willing to talk about all this.
I appreciate the time and appreciate you letting me share the story. And if anything, it hopefully helps others know there's a resource like this out there. And I think you should be part of the standard of care. I think every patient that's going through a similar journey should understand this platform exists and that they have ability to leverage it and use it. And I just appreciate you all keeping it free, and I appreciate that people can donate and pay it forward. I mean, we certainly did. I know many of our friends and family did as well to keep the platform going for others to use, because this platform became a vital part of our care journey.
Again, big thanks to John for his willingness to share his story and for his glowing endorsement of the platform. Speaking of Caring Bridge, this is our final episode before a little summer break. We will be back in September with more episodes and more stories of caregiving, connection, and the many ways support shows up when life changes unexpectedly. Until then, I hope you all can find a little hopium of your own, and we'll see you soon.